Hello everyone, and welcome back to a special radio show. This is the story hour for the radio show. I told you guys I would tell you guys. Well, hello everybody, welcome back to the Massachusetts Central Radio Show, the Massachusetts whatever, the Camo's Log Corner. Camo's Blog Corner, and Camo's Automotive Radio Show, for those of you who want to know it. And for those of you who are still tuning in, will still remember all the names. The Blog Corner, it was the Camo's Blog Corner, MC Radio Show, and then Camo's Automotive Radio Show. I told you guys I would tell you guys the story of Cliff Gottlieb, who contested the Rolex 24 in 1970, the 1970 edition, and actually did one of the most interesting jobs. So Cliff Gottlieb actually was a Corvette guy. He actually worked on Corvettes as a mechanic. He actually knew the cars better than most of the engineers and most of the people who actually sold them. Actually, he knew how to replace the carburetors, he knew how to build the motors, he knew how to build the body, he knew how to fabricate the fiberglass and stuff like that, knew how to just do them all. So in 1967, he ordered a 1976 LED convertible. Yes, LED8s were in convertibles, but Gottlieb had a hardtop on it. So for those of you who don't know what the L88 is, the L88 is the big racing engine. It was 540 to 550 horsepower. Although it was rated at the factory for insurance purposes, because in 1967 the insurance rates were starting to go up, and General Motors didn't want to advertise more than 435 horsepower, because if they had 500, it would be considered a race car and a supercar, and that wouldn't have been fun. It was a drag motor mostly. L88, the Z01 and the L88 were mostly drag racing motors. They were aluminum block 427, lightweight aluminum block 427s with big carburetor and big heads, valves, less restrictive exhaust. Cars made around 435 horsepower, but the cars were made anywhere from 400 and 540 to about 600 horsepower on the dyno, especially for drag racing. And Cliff Gottlieb got a white on blue, one, and he ended up ordering it a convertible with a white car with a blue stripe on it. Well, I think he put the blue stripe on later. Had the shaker hood and stuff like that. He raced it in SCCA, quite successful actually in its career. He raced it in SCCA and some other road races in America, and the car was quite successful. I forget how many wins it got, but it was done pretty well. From what I remember, he took out the 427 when he road raced it, so he could conserve the original 427. He took the 427 out and put a 383 in it, stroked it, and he ran that. And he ran like I think it was 300 and I think it was like 400 horsepower, and he was able to win. He was able to win a lot of SCCA races, and then if he went to a big track where top speed was kind of necessary, like Daytona, or well, not Daytona, but places like Riverside and most sport and stuff like that. He would run the 427 to limit the miles, and eventually, I believe the 427, from what I know, the 427 did blow up somewhere in the late 60s, and then in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, I think he put a 454 that had around, I don't know, 400 and like 50 to maybe 500, maybe 450 to 500 horsepower. And he decided to enter into Daytona in 1970. Now, he had already won the car. Now, the strange thing was, he ordered the car, then the Chevrolet dealership waited and waited and waited, didn't pick up the car, and waited until they told him, no, sir, you have to pick up the car. Picked up the car, did it all. And then in 1970, in November 1969, he decided to enter Le Mans, and he was going up against cars that were 2 or 3 years old, and his car was about maybe 67, 68, 69, 70. Yeah, so he was up against cars that were 4 or 5 years old. He was going up against cars that were, his cars were 4 years old. He was going up against cars that were like 2 to 3, like 1 to 2 years old. From what I remember from the book, Tony Lorenzo would be entering his Corvette, the Corning's fiberglass, a couple other ones. You know, these were C3 class Corvettes, and they actually had the bigger motor. They had around 500, and they also had around 500 horsepower. I think they had anywhere between 450 to 500 horsepower. These were the cars that were going to qualify at the front of the field. Gottlieb just had to make it in, had to work all night, all day, all night to work it, to put it into the field. They had to put a new motor, they had to put a new transmission in, and like 2 days before, like a day before, like 2 days before they were supposed to leave for the race, Gottlieb stupidly rented off his trailer to a friend of his in a dune buggy, and the guy who ran the dune buggy actually crashed it and wrecked it, so he didn't have a trailer. So what they decided to do was, they were like, oh, we're going to drive 1,636 miles from Kansas, because Gottlieb and I think it was William Dooley, who was his co-driver, said, we're going to drive 663 miles. And the story goes, they were about to pack up. They're like, oh no, this was like 2 days before the race. Like qualifying, like practice was supposed to be the day. This was on Tuesday night, and they just finished the car. They were supposed to be at Daytona on Thursday. They weren't going to get there till Thursday. They finished the car on a Tuesday. They were supposed to leave on a Wednesday. They were supposed to trailer it and get down there on a Thursday, and get ready for practice and qualifying and all that other stuff, because they only practice a couple of days. I forget the schedule of the race, but so Gottlieb, actually be great if I could actually find a real race schedule for the 24 actually. So I give you guys an idea of just how crazy this effort was. You got to imagine, he's gonna race 2,000 miles, over 2,000 miles if he finishes in this race, and he's got to drive 1,663 miles. He just finished the car, that night, and what happened was one of the lead guys, not William Dooley, but one of the other guys that was I think it was the crew chief of the project, was like, no, we're not going to Daytona. My treasure's wrecked. We're not doing anything. We're not going to do it. I'm just going to go next year, or I'm just going to sit out, or we're just going to go next year. He said no. He went to the auto parts store. This is a true story. He went to the auto parts store, got 2 stock mufflers, took out the side pipes on the 427, on the 454, put them in the El Camino trailer that they were going to use, and they were going to drive the Corvette. Over 1,600 miles. Yeah, you can see how this was. And what was interesting was actually, funny story, when he was driving the car home, he actually drove the car home like 100 miles, and he found out that the gas in the car wasn't up to actually powering the L88. The L88 needed race gas. He put like the equivalent of 93 back then in the car. You're supposed to put Sunoco 260 GTX in this stuff. Sunoco 260 GTX is like 100, like 4 octane gas. Just to let you know. Well, they actually don't tell you. Well, damn, they don't tell you the official results. All I know is, well, I know where he finished, but I'm not gonna. Kip Gottlieb, not William Dooley, David Dooley was his name. But I will digress. Which one will finish? But I will obviously tell you guys the schedule for the 24. Yeah, so Gottlieb, so they put on the side pipes. They packed an El Camino with spare tires and a bunch of other things. GM Goodrich, who were supplying them at the race because he knew the guy, actually the deal fell out, so he actually had to find his own tire supply when he got to the track, which was huge. Which was huge, thanks, because General Motors would do anything and everything. Racing sports cars. You guys want to know a great site to figure out what the heck's going on? Look no further than racing sports cars. It's a great thing. I can tell you guys all you guys need to know about this event. So, oh, by the way, they were in the Grand Touring class, which was part of a 9-car field. So 9-car field, and they were one of 76 cars entered. Only 65 qualified. They were qualified just. Technical data, race results, grid, lap times, entered cars. So they had one qualifying practice session on 130, and then they had 6 non-qualifying practice sessions. So they qualifying on the 30th. The race was on the 31st, I think. Yeah, it was on February. Yeah, the Daytona 24 Hours was on the 1st. So it was on the 1st of February. They had 6 non-prop for 720 minutes. Let me find a calendar from 1970 to let you guys know. So I think they missed So I think they missed like one session, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 1 or 2 sessions of them. So if they had 6 sessions, usually they have, um, one. Oh, so, all right. So the qualifying session was on Friday and the race was on the 1st, and then the race was on the 31st. And then, okay, so they actually missed Wednesday. They got in Thursday, and then they had to qualify on Friday. So they missed Wednesday's session. They planned to get into, so they drove 1,636 miles. They drove day and night. They barely slept. And Cliff Gottlieb barely slept because he did all these driving, because he did all these things. He's already been up. I think he was already up 3 days before already. So those eyes were bloodshot. They get down to Daytona. They can't even register on Wednesday night, and they had to, and they couldn't register on Thursday night. So they had to actually qualify the car on Friday without any practice. So they they got in on Thursday, and then they did a couple practice sessions, and on Friday they had qualified with barely any running, and plus they already shook the car down 1,636 miles. So the cars are going to put on another couple. Cars are going to put on like 50, 60 miles on the rest of the weekend, and then the race, which is another 2,000, which was another 2,000 for them. So they qualified the car, and then during the qualifying session, the gear linkage, the clutch and one of the gears fused together because it was so cold. And you got to remember, this is Daytona in February, so Daytona can get pretty cold. It can get as low as 40 degrees. It can get as hot as like 70, 80 degrees. And this weekend was cold, so it was rainy and it was miserable. And they had to find a shop. So he didn't have any money. He actually ran into Smokey Unick, who had a garage in the area, usually for stock car fame. And for those of you who know, Smokey Unick, I'll talk to you guys about him on another day. Famous rule bender and cheater in NASCAR. Awesome guy. I'll have to obviously talk about him one of these days. So he gives them the keys, and he says, take however long you want. He said, take however long you want, just make sure to lock up and all this other stuff. So they unfused the gears. They rebuilt the transmission. They rebuilt the transmission just before the start of the race. Got in there, and they ended up driving. Dave Dooley and Cliff Gottlieb, these guys were crazy. They went on through the night, and they eventually got through the night, and then they got into the daytime. And the car was relatively good. The car would go 192 to 195 on the straights. This is at Daytona. Remember, there's no bus stop chicane back then, and they were getting passed by the Ferrari 512s, and on one occasion that wasn't quite the case, but I'll tell you that in a minute. They were getting passed by all the prototypes who were miles faster, and the Jim's Corning Owens fiberglass with Richard Dick Thompson and Tony Lorenzo and stuff like that. They were way ahead of these guys, and they always came in with a problem. They always had an oil leak, or something didn't do well, or there was a sprocket going on. They fixed out all those problems, and they were able to. They knew they weren't going to really challenge for, I think, one of the L88 Corvettes, one of the C3 Corvettes, one of the faster ones, the ones that were going about 205, 210 on the banking, because they had 500, they had 500 horsepower, 540 to 560 horsepower. So go figure that they have that the engines that can outrun everything else. The Corvettes were actually when the tires wore off on the some of the prototypes, some of the Corvettes were actually able to stay up because of the mechanical grip, which brings me to the funniest story of the whole book. So he was fighting, so like 2 or 3 hours from the finish, Mario Andretti, who's trying to catch the Porsche 9, who's trying to catch the Porsche 917s, 917Ks. He comes up on Mario Andretti, and Andretti actually is struggling to keep his tires under him. The Porsche 9, the 512 weighs about 950 kilograms, and the Porsches weigh about 850. And that extra 200 pounds really handed it to the Porsches. Yeah, they were faster and straight. Yeah, the Porsches were, and I think the Porsches sandbagged in the race and stuff like that. So he comes up on Andretti, and Andretti is struggling to keep the 512, and the 512 is brand new. It's only been run. It's only been tested over in Europe a couple of times. This is kind of its first big race, and he's struggling to keep the pavement. And Gottlieb is driving past Andretti. Andretti's sitting in the cockpit, wondering why this little teeny itty bitty little Corvette is blowing by his 200-mile-an-hour prototype. Now, if Andretti was on fresh tires, he would have been able to move right on the 512, even though it's 950 kilograms. Even though it's 950 kilograms, and it's about, maybe, I don't know. Even if it's 950, it's about 1,000 pounds light. It's about 1,000 pounds lighter than this big block Corvette that's right next to him. He's passing him. He got him on the straight. Andretti would pass him on the straight. Then when you went onto the little chicane, then when you went into the International Horseshoe, if you guys watched my track video from Project Cars 2, the International and the dogleg and the kink, Andretti couldn't keep the car under him. He was struggling so hard to keep the car under him. Gottlieb was actually able to get back on the straight and pass him, and Andretti faded. And I think Andretti had to Andretti was, I think, like 100. I think by this time, Andretti was somewhere in the region of like, I think Andretti was many laps down because they had so many problems with the car. And yeah, Andretti would finish over 48 laps down, and he would be driving with Arturo Mazzario and Jackie Ickx. He would complete 676 laps. And then the Owens Corning fiberglass car would be Jerry Thompson and Joe Mailer. He would finish there. Bob Johnson was one of the other Corvettes that was in the field. I think there was another big block Corvette, I think. John Greenwood was also in there. He fell 100 laps with an accident. But yeah, they they had a it lists the Corvette as a 7-liter, was it really 7.4? It was really a 7.4 though. Yeah, so and then behind him, and then like 2 spots behind him in the running was Tony DeLorenzo and Dick Lang in another Corvette that was by that time like almost 190 laps, 100 and something odd laps down to the leaders. So they finished the race. I think the car was starting to overheat, so they had to nurse the car back into the pits. They finished 11th overall, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they finished second in class. So pretty damn good for a car that barely got any practice. And they were right up there with Porsche 911S's, Ford Mustangs, Matras from the Henri Pescarolo, Jean Pierre Beltois, and they actually finished ahead of a Camaro in a Touring 2.0 one, and then GT Wood 2.0. So yeah, they won 11th overall, second in class. They finished with 454 laps, which if I'm doing my math correctly, was 2,079 miles. So, as I said before in the Monday video, they completed over 3,000. They completed over 3,600 and like 3,600. No, they completed like 3,000. 3,000. They like 3,700 miles or something like that in the course of the weekend. And in case you're wondering, they would have done as many laps as the leaders if they had. That was probably going to be around as many laps as the leaders, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, so they created 2,000. Oh, they did 2,737 miles, which, so I'm going to say that they did 700 miles. They actually did more miles in that weekend than the winning car did. And the average speed was 115. And the pole, for those of you who want to know, was a 151. And was a 151. And that was because the Porsches sandbagged like crazy in the race. So, oh yes, by the way, that the Deserter GS Volkswagen with 1.7 normally aspirated engine, HRH Corp, that one didn't even enter. So yeah, that was kind of Cliff Gottlieb's. I actually enjoyed the book. I'll give you guys a link in the description. I'll give you guys a title in the description when I'm done with this video, because I want you guys to really pick up the book. I'm not really going to spoil all of it because I want you guys to really read the book. It's really fascinating, and it teaches you the history of the Daytona 24 and how much goes into it. And a huge effort went into it. Both of Gottlieb's sisters ended up who were flight attendants. They kind of canceled all their plans, and they kind of took time off to be the timekeepers and stuff like that. After he got out of the car, Gottlieb hands were like this, like they were like you couldn't like they were like claws. They were because the small diameter steering wheel that this darn thing had cramped his eyes, and his eyes were bloodshot. They practically had to take the hardtop off on the car, I believe, in some stories, and they actually had to lift him out, and they had to kind of let him drink fluids because he was dehydrated. I'm surprised that he did not crash one bit with the lack of sleep he had. So that's the story of Cliff Gottlieb's improbable Daytona win. Daytona, his second in class, 11th overall, with barely any practice, and just barely any qualifying. So it goes to show that these small little heroes can do it. The big guys, the big names, don't always do that justice. But it's kind of one of those small guy, big man effort type thing. And I hope you guys learned something. Please do pick up the book. Please do actually pick up the book if you have it on Kindle, or if you can grab a copy of it. I'll try to see if there's a physical copy of the book. I think there might be. So I'll give it a link. So I'll put it in the description, and I'll put how many pages it is and what year it is, maybe. But yeah, I'll see you guys later. I hope you guys enjoyed the story, and I will be back for Friday for qualifying highlight. Well, actually, I may give an update for practice, and then qualifying on, well, actually, not qualifying, but sessions on Friday, and then I will give updates during the 24. I'm actually going to be working most of the weekend, so I'm actually not going to be able to catch the 24 in its entirety. So this is the first time I'm actually not going to catch it, so I'm going to have to catch it on the phone, actually, on IMSA TV. So I'll watch some of it when I get back home on Saturday, and then Sunday I'm basically not going to do that, and Sunday I'm basically going to listen to it on the IMSA radio and stuff like that while I'm doing inventory counts. I'm actually going to be working from like 9 o'clock till like 9 o'clock at night, and or later if I so please. It'll be fun. So plus I'm gonna get Tuesday and Wednesday off, so I'll be even happier. So I'll see you guys later. So I'll see you guys later. I'm gonna keep up with the race, but I'm not gonna give you live updates and stuff like that. So, and I may not be able to record a lot of gameplay, so I'm actually thinking of skipping doing the race, the 24-minute race. I may do a day-night simulation, maybe. I don't know. It depends on what I want to do. I may record it tomorrow night and then post it Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday obviously is the race, so I'll have to obviously do that. But yeah, I hope you guys have fun. Hope you guys have fun this weekend, and I'm looking to seeing you guys back on Friday. I'll see you guys later. Bye.